Professor Geraldine Hartshorne, who completed her PhD under the supervision of Bob in 1988. She is Scientific Director of the Coventry Centre for Reproductive Medicine and Professor at Warwick Medical School. Geraldine is a contributor to many books, including Visualization in Medicine and Life Sciences, the Textbook of Clinical Embryology, The First 12 Weeks of Gestation, Essential IVF, and also the textbook of IVF and assisted reproduction.
I first met Bob Edwards in 1985. He was still Dr. Edwards. He still hadn't been recognised or given a chair at that point, although this was after the birth of Louise Brown. And I had come to Cambridge for my PhD interview with him. And it was very much as you would see in that photo there. He was sat behind his desk in physiology, surrounded by papers and books and slides, and a cheese and onion sandwich, which was his usual lunchtime snack. And I was in his office. Next door, Barbara was tapping on her typewriter. Behind me, if I was, taking this photograph, behind me would be a large table, also covered with papers and books and slides and slides and more slides, microscope slides and slides that were for presentations, so 35mm photographic slides. Now, I'd just come down from Leeds, where I was doing my first degree, so I was pretty used to the Yorkshire accent, but I still found Bob's distinctive version of it quite hard to follow, so I just nodded along and did my best in my interview. And the only things that I can remember really of him, of what he said, were, "My door is always open, but there's usually no one behind it," which is one of his usual jokes. "It's sink or swim here, and you'll need a car to get to Bourne Hall." Now, I could drive. I didn't have a car, but I worked out that I'm going to have to find one. So in due course, I arrived in Cambridge to do my PhD. I was given a most beautiful room in Darwin College that overlooked Cam and had really a lovely time there. But I was starting to realise what sink or swim meant. And sink or swim was referring to the PhD students that started with Bob. About half of them would either change supervisors or drop out at some point along the way. You really did have to swim if you were going to stay on your course. And we've heard a little bit about the atmosphere from colleagues, which was considerably challenging and unwelcoming to people such as myself who wanted to work with Bob. And I was often asked, "Why are you working with him? What do you hope to achieve in that field?" It was really quite unwelcoming, with the extreme exception of Ruth Fowler, who was extremely helpful and kind on many, many occasions in the Marshall Lab. And I also learnt that if you could see Bob's car on the Downing site, then there was a chance he might be in his office. But if his car was not there, then you could save yourself going up those stairs that Jenny mentioned earlier. It was quite a hike to the very top floor to get to his office. But by and large, I preferred working at Bourne Hall. About 10 miles from Cambridge, this beautiful hall, tranquil setting surrounded by trees and parkland, absolutely gorgeous. Although, whilst I was there, it was a little bit more like this. The hall you can see on the right, and the old stable blocks were on the left. This beautiful big tree that Bob absolutely adored and would not have cut down when, as you can see, the foundations here for the new embryology buildings were being put together. The tree actually fell onto these foundations, which was considered by some to be an act of God. But still, the embryology lab was in this little cluster of porta cabins here, and the patients were in this big one here, and the theatres were somewhere in between. The research lab was in the ground floor of this beautiful stable block, which had been lightly renovated with sort of kitchen cabinets and things to make it vaguely like a lab. But the period features, such as the hay racks, were left complete with spiders. So it was an interesting place to do tissue culture research. This was where I started my editing career because Bob put me on the team of this new journal that he was starting called Human Reproduction. And so that was great fun. The ghost in the attic at Bourne Hall was, of course, Jean Purdy. Jean, in some of her later times, had a flat up in the attic. The attic was beautiful. And it was a lovely place to go. It had a special atmosphere up there. And many people have reported that they've heard noises from the attic. I never did personally, and I never met Jean Purdy in person or her ghost, but there was a bed made up in this little flat up the top that was made up for many years after her passing. And so her memory lived on for a long time. At Bourne Hall, the staff had mixed views towards me. Some understood and were sympathetic to research, and others less so. So that really taught me a lot about how to do research in a clinical setting. I remember distinctly the midday meetings where every member of staff turned up to discuss every single patient one by one, where they were at in terms of their treatment, what we could do to help them, what they should have in terms of medication for the next day, and so on. And the first baby party, we've heard about these excellent events. Now, my memories of Bob were, as we've heard, had very privileged access to him as PhD students. You've got Sue Avery here on the right, also another PhD student of Bob's, along with me on this photo. Bob always treated us as equals. He would discuss anything that we wanted to. He'd listen very carefully to what we said and give us straight answers, usually on many topics, into the late night sometimes, at any time of day, as Jenny said, whatever, he would be there for us. He gave us absolute academic freedom to choose the topics that we wanted to pursue, and that included freedom to fail, which you don't often get nowadays in universities. He had high expectations of us. He put opportunities in our way, and he trusted us to just get on and do it and do the best job we could with those opportunities. He never gave up. If it was important, he stuck with it. He kept his promises. If he said he'd phone you back, he phoned you back. Might be late, but he'd still phone you back. The integrity was really there. Anybody that met him could really see that shining out. His humour, yes, he was constantly teasing, making jokes. Had many, many diverse interests. He was a local councillor. His farm, he often talked about the farm. We've heard about the Angora goats. The goats and the sheep often used to escape from the farm, and he used to come in with tales of chasing them down the lanes in Dry Drayton. But always wise words and a practical, down-to-earth approach. So some of his catchphrases: we must do our best for this lady. That was one that he would say regularly, especially at those midday meetings. Beware the abominable no man. Now that was one especially for me, I think. The abominable no man is the person who will say no, always say no. It's a habit because it's the easiest thing to do. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. You can read upside down, can't you? Those of us who are old enough to remember 35mm slides that go into projectors will understand this, because those projectors were often loaded with the slides in the wrong orientation. So the slides would come out back to front or upside down. And he'd just carry on with his talk regardless when this technical glitch happened. He'd just say, you can read upside down, can't you? And off he went. And again, technical glitches with slides. You have to be able to give your talk with or without the slides. And it is your duty as a speaker to be able to entertain the audience for as long as you have to, regardless of these things. And you'll see Barry has done some of that earlier with great aplomb. Never throw data away, very wise. And from his own experiences of trying to get things published, we have to believe the authors. He would often side with the authors against referees where there was some sort of disagreement over whether something should be published, because he had himself experienced difficulties getting things published. Now, others are going to speak about his legacy more than me, I think, but I just wanted to focus on just a couple of points here. IVF was never patented. I think it might have been quite a different world if it had been patented, but it never was. And I'd also like to highlight here the equal partnership between Steptoe and Edwards, scientists and medics, and others, including the likes of Jean Purdy, nurses, others in our field. It's a really good example for us to follow. So here we are, Bob, 100 now. Where are we? Where are we now? I don't think we're in a particularly good place with IVF. NHS funding is low and getting less. There's little funding for research, but we're still working with a really low evidence base for this field. We try, many of us in this field, to improve it, but the funding is not forthcoming. And the success rates for IVF are still mediocre, and we still can't say to any individual patient, yes, it's going to work for you, or no, it's not going to work for you. That, I think, is a real challenge. And Bob knew that the only way to improve matters was to do research. And not everybody knows that. And one of the people who didn't know that was the abominable no man called Peter Goldsworthy, who was the managing director of Bourne Hall back in 1985. And his quote was, "Doing research is the same as burning £20 notes." And unfortunately, this attitude prevails still nowadays in many places that I would have thought should probably know better. So what can we do with our various roles? I'd like to suggest that we can donate research material, such as eggs and embryos, as those brave ladies did, the 282 or more, including Grace. Thank you for doing that. We can lobby all the powers that be to make sure that they are aware of the importance of IVF for people's lives. We should support and participate in research. All these methods, the add-ons, the clinical trials, they all need people to be engaged with those trials. We should talk about infertility, we should stop it being a taboo subject, and we should educate the children and the adults about fertility and infertility and how common it is. And there's a lot of work to do there. So when we get tired and stressed, we should still follow Bob's example of spending time with nature, with our families, with the things that matter, getting back to the real basics and focusing on making sure that our vision for the future and what we want to achieve is really aligned with what needs to happen for the future of this field.